The penthouse glittered 47 floors above Manhattan, where champagne flowed and laughter echoed off floor-to-ceiling windows. Claire Whitmore stood near the bar, her smile tight as another guest leaned in. "Still coming to these things alone, Claire?" The circle tittered. Someone chimed in, voice dripping with mockery. "Why not bring the janitor? That black single dad who works nights downstairs." Claire's jaw tightened. In a moment of wounded pride, she heard herself say, "Maybe I will." 47 floors below, Marcus Cole received a handwritten invitation. No explanation. He glanced toward his daughter doing homework in the hallway, then made a decision. Marcus Cole had learned the architecture of invisibility long before he ever pushed a mop across marble floors. He understood which elevator banks to avoid during rush hour, which hallways to take when residents wanted to pretend the building cleaned itself. He knew the particular way security guards watched him when he walked through the main lobby, even in his uniform, even with his ID badge clearly visible. He had memorized the micro-expressions of discomfort that crossed faces when he stepped into an elevator already occupied by someone in business attire. The slight shuffle backward, the protective hand moving toward a purse or pocket, the sudden fascination with phone screens. These were the small violences of daily life, so routine they barely registered anymore. He had worked the night shift at the Meridian for 3 years now, one of the most exclusive residential towers on the Upper East Side. The pay was decent. The hours allowed him to be home when Maya woke up, to walk her to school, to help with homework before his shift began. That was what mattered. Not the way Mr. Patterson in 42B looked through him like glass. Not the way Mrs. Chen in 38 clutched her designer bag tighter whenever they shared an elevator. Marcus had grown up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, raised by a grandmother who cleaned houses in Park Slope for 40 years. She had taught him that dignity was not something anyone could give you or take away. It lived inside, she said, in the way you carried yourself, in the work you did with your hands, in the love you poured into raising a child right. He thought about her often during the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when he buffed floors that would be scuffed again by morning. Maya was the center of everything. 7 years old, curious about the world, already reading 2 grades above her level. Her mother had left when Maya was 2, overwhelmed by motherhood, by poverty, by a life that had not turned out the way she planned. Marcus did not blame her anymore. What he could afford was to be present, to be steady, to build a life for his daughter, one careful brick at a time. 47 floors above, Claire Whitmore was putting the finishing touches on an event she hosted twice a year, a gathering of Manhattan's elite that served no purpose except to remind everyone of their place in the hierarchy. She had inherited her money, her penthouse, and her social obligations from a father who believed wealth was proof of worth. The joke about the janitor had stung because it was not really about him at all. It was about her, about the pity masked as humor. She had agreed to the invitation out of spite, not generosity. The fact that Marcus Cole was a human being with his own history, his own dignity, his own daughter waiting in a basement hallway, had not occurred to her. Marcus changed in the maintenance room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He owned 1 suit, purchased second-hand 3 years ago for his grandmother's funeral. Navy blue, slightly too large in the shoulders, but well cared for. He had kept it wrapped in plastic at the back of his locker. He was not dressing to impress anyone. He was dressing so they could not dismiss him quite so easily. Maya looked up from her homework when he emerged. Her eyes widened at the sight of him in something other than his gray uniform. "You look fancy, Daddy." He knelt down to her level, smoothing a hand over her braids. "I have to go upstairs for a little while. Mrs. Rodriguez will sit with you." She nodded. "Okay, don't be too long." He kissed her forehead. Never. The elevator ride took 90 seconds. Marcus counted each floor as the numbers climbed, his reflection ghosting across the polished brass doors. He did not know why he had been invited. He did not know what waited for him at the top, but he knew this. Whatever happened, he would walk into that room the same way he walked into every room. Quietly, steadily, with the unshakable knowledge of exactly who he was. The elevator doors opened onto a different world. Marcus stepped out into a foyer larger than his entire apartment. All white marble and fresh flowers and soft lighting designed to make everything look expensive. Through an archway, he could see the party in full swing. Women in gowns that cost more than his annual salary. Men in suits tailored so precisely they seemed to move without effort. Waiters circulating with silver trays. The clink of crystal, the murmur of voices accustomed to being heard. He stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust not to the light but to the reality of where he was. Then he walked forward, his pace unhurried, his shoulders relaxed. He did not smile, he did not frown. He simply moved through space as though he had every right to be there, because he did. Someone had invited him. He had accepted. Everything else was just noise. The first person to notice him was a woman in her 60s, draped in emeralds, holding a champagne flute like a scepter. Her eyes tracked him across the room with the kind of attention usually reserved for something that did not belong. She whispered to the man beside her. He turned. They both stared. Around them, conversation began to falter. One pocket of silence spreading to another like ripples in still water. Claire saw him from across the room. She had been mid-sentence, saying something to someone she did not particularly like, when the shift in atmosphere made her look toward the entrance. There he was, the janitor from the basement, except he did not look like a janitor now. He looked like a man who had walked into a room and decided not to apologize for it. She had expected something different. Nervousness, maybe. Discomfort. The hunched shoulders and downcast eyes of someone who knew they were out of place. Instead, she saw a quiet confidence that made her own posture seem somehow less certain. He was not performing. He was not pretending to be something he was not. He was simply present, fully and completely, in a way that made everyone else in the room seem like they were playing roles they had learned by heart. Someone near the bar said it loud enough to carry. "Is that really the janitor?" The question hung in the air, waiting for an answer that never came. Marcus heard it. He did not react. His expression remained calm, his gaze steady as he surveyed the room with the quiet patience of a man who had nothing to prove. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne. Marcus took a glass with a quiet thank you. The waiter blinked, clearly unused to being acknowledged by anyone in this room. Claire found herself moving toward him without quite deciding to. The other guests parted around her, their whispers following like a wake. She stopped a few feet away, suddenly uncertain what to say. The words she had prepared, the casual dismissal she had planned, seemed inadequate now. He met her eyes without flinching, without anger, without the deference she had unconsciously expected. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "thank you for the invitation." His voice was low and even, neither grateful nor resentful. Just factual. She had invited him. He had come. That was all there was to say. Claire nodded, words failing her for perhaps the first time in her adult life. Around them, the party continued, but something had shifted. The air felt different, charged with an awareness that had not been there before. Marcus Cole had walked into this room expecting nothing and demanding nothing except to be seen as what he was, a man. And somehow, that simple expectation had changed everything. What followed was a performance Claire would later recognize as something she had been complicit in all her life. The polite interrogation began almost immediately, led by a man named Richard who had made his fortune in hedge funds and his reputation in casual cruelty. "So," Richard said, positioning himself in front of Marcus with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I don't think I've seen you at one of Claire's gatherings before. What field are you in?" The question was a trap, and everyone knew it. The real question was simpler. Why are you here? Who let you in? What makes you think you belong? Marcus took a measured sip of champagne before responding. "I work in the building. a beat of silence. Richard's smile tightened. In the building? In what capacity, if you don't mind my asking? Maintenance. Night shift. The word spread through the nearby clusters of guests like a current. Maintenance. Night shift. The janitor. He was actually the janitor. The expressions around him shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The polite interest curdled into something else. Curiosity mixed with contempt. Amusement at what they now understood to be a joke. A woman in red, whose name Marcus would never learn, leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made them both laugh. A man with silver hair and a face like a closed door literally stepped back, as though poverty might be contagious. The space around Marcus widened. He stood in a circle of expensive air, alone except for his champagne glass and his dignity. Claire watched from a few feet away, frozen in a kind of moral paralysis she did not quite understand. She should say something. She should intervene. But what would she say? How could she explain that she had invited him not out of kindness but out of pique? That he was here because of a cruel joke she had chosen to double down on rather than reject? Her silence was a choice, and she knew it, but the choosing felt impossible. So she stood there, watching, saying nothing, becoming more complicit with every passing second. A journalist named Amanda, who wrote a society column for a publication that pretended to be about culture, approached Marcus with her phone already recording. "Fascinating," she said, not bothering to introduce herself. "Can I ask what it's like? Being here, in this environment? Is this some kind of social experiment? A commentary on class dynamics?" The questions were not really questions. They were provocations dressed up as journalism, designed to make Marcus perform his own humiliation for the entertainment of others. She wanted him to be uncomfortable, to stammer, to provide content for her column. He looked at her for a long moment before responding. "I was invited." Amanda blinked, clearly unsatisfied. "But surely you must feel something about being in a room like this. The contrast, between your usual environment and this." She gestured vaguely at the penthouse, the art on the walls, the view of Central Park glittering in the darkness below. Marcus set his champagne glass on a passing waiter's tray. "My usual environment is wherever I happen to be standing. Right now, that's here." He turned and walked toward the window, leaving Amanda with her recording and her assumptions and her complete failure to understand what she had just witnessed. She stared after him, confusion flickering across her face before she composed herself and went looking for easier prey. By the window, Marcus stood alone, looking out at the city below. 47 floors down, his daughter was finishing her homework. 3 miles south, the apartment where his grandmother had raised him still stood, now occupied by strangers. Everywhere he looked, there were lights, lives, stories he would never know. He did not feel sorry for himself. He did not feel angry. He felt something more complicated, a bone-deep awareness of how the world worked, how it had always worked, how it would probably continue to work long after he was gone. The problem was not the individual cruelties. Richard's interrogation, Amanda's performance of curiosity, the whispers and the laughter and the widening circle of empty space. The problem was the system that made all of it possible, the unspoken rules that determined who belonged and who did not, who got to speak and who got to listen, who mattered and who could be safely ignored. He had known these rules all his life. He had learned to navigate them, to survive within them, to protect his daughter from the worst of their consequences. But tonight, standing in a room full of people who would never see him as fully human, he felt the weight of those rules more heavily than he had in years. Claire continued to watch him from across the room. She saw the way he stood at the window, still and composed, looking out at the city as though he owned it. And perhaps, in some way that mattered more than money, he did. He owned himself. He owned his presence. He owned his refusal to be diminished by the smallness of the people around him. It was more than she could say for herself. The turning point came from a direction no one expected. A man named Charles, old money with a voice like honey poured over broken glass, decided the joke had gone on long enough. He had been watching Marcus all evening, amused by the spectacle, waiting for the right moment to deliver the punchline. "You know," Charles said, loud enough for the room to hear. "I have to admire Claire's commitment to the bit." He raised his glass in a mock toast. Inviting the janitor to a party, actually getting him to show up. It's performance art, really. Social commentary at its finest. The laughter started small and spread quickly. Not everyone joined in, but enough did. Claire felt her face flush, caught between the desperate desire to disappear and the dawning recognition of what she had set in motion. She had started this. She had invited him. And now she was watching it unfold, paralyzed by her own complicity. Charles was not finished. "I wonder what the going rate is for this kind of entertainment. More than his usual hourly, I assume?" He looked directly at Marcus now, his smile sharp as a knife. "What do you think? Did Claire promise you overtime for playing dress-up with the grown-ups?" The room went quiet. Not the respectful silence of listening, but the held-breath silence of watching something terrible unfold. Something they did not want to miss. Something that would become a story they told at other parties, embellished and polished until the cruelty became merely amusing. Marcus turned from the window. He looked at Charles for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Claire, and something passed between them. Not words, just a recognition of what had happened, and what was still happening, and what would continue to happen unless someone changed the story. "I wasn't promised anything," Marcus said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "I was invited. I came. And now I understand why." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Everyone in that room understood exactly what he meant. The invitation had never been about hospitality or inclusion or any of the words people use to make themselves feel generous. It had been about entertainment, about proving a point, about using a human being as a prop in someone else's performance. Claire could not meet his eyes. She stared at the floor, at her shoes, at anything except the man she had used as a prop in her own small drama. Her silence had been the loudest statement of the evening, louder than Charles's cruelty, louder than Amanda's questions, louder than all the whispers and the laughter combined. She had stood there and said nothing, done nothing, while a man was humiliated for the crime of accepting an invitation she had extended. The other guests began to shift uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others suddenly found their drinks fascinating. A few had the decency to look ashamed, though whether for their own behavior or merely for being caught witnessing it was impossible to say. The party had reached the moment when everyone wanted to pretend they were somewhere else. Marcus recognized the moment for what it was, not a climax or a confrontation, just a clear view of the line between being invited somewhere and being welcome there. He had known these people existed. He had known how they thought, how they saw the world, how they categorized human beings into those who mattered and those who did not. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your bones were different experiences. Tonight, the knowledge had become physical. It sat in his chest like a stone. He thought about Maya, waiting for him in the basement. He thought about his grandmother, who had spent 40 years cleaning the homes of people like this, who had come home tired every night and still found the energy to read him stories and teach him right from wrong. He thought about all the invisible workers who kept this building running, who kept this city running, who made possible the comfortable lives of people who would never see them as fully human. For a moment, he felt the urge to speak, to tell them what their world looked like from the outside, to explain the 1,000 small indignities that accumulated over a lifetime of being looked through, stepped around, treated as furniture rather than flesh. But he knew it would change nothing. Words could not penetrate walls this thick. Only actions could do that, and actions took time. More time than he had tonight. Claire finally looked up, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. In her gaze, Marcus saw something he had not expected. Recognition. She knew what she had done. She understood, perhaps for the first time, the weight of her choices. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. The first honest thing that had happened all evening. Marcus did not leave immediately. That would have been a kind of retreat, a concession to their power over him. Instead, he finished looking out the window, taking his time, refusing to let their judgment rush him. He memorized the view, the sprawl of lights below, the dark rectangle of Central Park, the distant shimmer of the Hudson River. He had never seen the city from this height before. He might never see it again. It seemed important to remember. Then he turned and walked toward the exit with the same unhurried pace he had used to enter. No one spoke to him. No one tried to stop him. He was already becoming invisible again, sliding back into the category of people who could be safely ignored. The party resumed around him as though he had never been there at all. The guests relieved that the uncomfortable moment had passed. The elevator doors closed behind him with a soft chime. The descent took 90 seconds. Marcus counted each floor as the numbers fell, watching his reflection ghost across the polished brass doors. 46, 32, 18. Each number a step back toward the world he actually lived in, the world that made sense, the world where he knew the rules. When the elevator reached the basement, he stepped out into the familiar territory of his life. The fluorescent lights, the concrete walls, the distant hum of machinery keeping the building alive while its residents slept. The air smelled of cleaning supplies and old pipes. It was not beautiful, but it was real. It was honest in a way the penthouse would never be. Mrs. Rodriguez was reading a magazine when he returned. Maya had fallen asleep on the folding chair, her homework scattered around her like fallen leaves. Her head rested on her arms, her breathing slow and peaceful. A small smile on her lips from some dream he would never know. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. This was what mattered. Not the penthouse 47 floors above, not the champagne or the crystal or the view. This small person, dreaming in a basement, trusting that her father would come back for her. That was everything. He gathered her homework papers quietly, stacking them in a neat pile. Then he lifted his daughter into his arms, careful not to wake her. She stirred slightly, her head settling against his shoulder with the complete trust of childhood. He thanked Mrs. Rodriguez and carried Maya to the small room in the back, where they sometimes rested when his shift ran long. In the darkness, holding his daughter, Marcus thought about the evening. Not with anger or self-pity, but with a kind of clear-eyed understanding. The most dangerous thing that had happened was not the laughter or the questions or Charles's pointed cruelty. The most dangerous thing was being used, being turned into a character in someone else's story, having his humanity reduced to a punchline in a joke he had never agreed to be part of. He thought about Claire, standing there in her expensive dress, saying nothing while the room closed in around him. He understood her, in a way. She was trapped too, maybe even more trapped than he was. Her cage was just made of different materials, gold instead of steel, silence instead of walls. She had everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. He almost felt sorry for her. Maya shifted in her sleep, murmuring something he could not quite hear. He pulled her closer, feeling her warmth against his chest. Tomorrow he would wake her up early, make her pancakes, walk her to school. He would ask about her homework and listen to her stories about her friends and pretend that nothing had happened. Because nothing had happened, really. Nothing that changed the fundamental facts of his life. He was still Marcus Cole. He was still Maya's father. He was still a man who knew his own worth, regardless of what anyone else thought. 47 floors above, Claire stood in her empty penthouse after the last guest had gone. The caterers had cleaned up. The flowers were wilting in their vases. She caught her reflection in the darkened window and did not recognize herself. Or rather, she recognized herself too well. She saw the woman she had become without noticing. The woman who used a person as a shield against mockery, who stood silent while cruelty unfolded, who chose comfort over conscience at every turn. She had crossed a line tonight. Not just a social boundary, but a moral one. And the worst part was how easy it had been. How natural it had felt. How perfectly it had fit into the patterns of her life. She poured herself a glass of water and sat alone in the dark, thinking about a man in a borrowed suit who had walked into her world and shown her exactly what it was worth. The aftermath unfolded in ways Claire had not anticipated. Word spread through the social circles she inhabited, but the story being told was not the one she expected. People were not laughing about the janitor at the party. They were whispering about Claire's judgment, her cruelty, her willingness to humiliate a working man for entertainment. The very people who had laughed along with Charles were now distancing themselves, rewriting history to cast themselves as innocent bystanders who had been appalled by the whole thing. That was how these circles worked. Cruelty was acceptable only when it could be blamed on someone else. Claire found herself declining invitations, avoiding phone calls, retreating into the silence of her penthouse. She told herself it was by choice, but the truth was more complicated. She was ashamed, and the shame grew heavier each day rather than lighter. It sat on her chest in the morning when she woke and followed her through the empty rooms of her home like a shadow she could not outrun. Marcus returned to his routine. The night shifts, the empty hallways, the invisible labor of keeping the building functioning while its residents slept. He mopped the same floors, emptied the same trash cans, maintained the same machinery that made other people's comfort possible. But something had shifted. The other staff members looked at him differently now. News traveled fast in the service corridors, faster than it traveled in the penthouses above. Everyone knew what had happened at Claire Whitmore's party. Some were sympathetic. An older woman who worked in housekeeping stopped him in the hallway one night and squeezed his hand without saying anything. A security guard named Jerome, who had worked in the building even longer than Marcus, nodded at him with something like respect. These small gestures meant more than they should have. Others kept their distance, as though his brief proximity to the wealthy had contaminated him somehow, made him suspect, marked him as someone who did not know his place. Maya noticed that her father was quieter than usual. She did not ask questions, but she watched him with the careful attention of a child who has learned to read adult moods. One evening, as he was helping her with her spelling words, she looked up at him and said, "You came home early the other night." From the place upstairs, Marcus nodded. "I did." She waited, giving him space to say more. When he did not, she returned to her spelling words without pressing. She was only 7, but she understood that some stories were not ready to be told. Some things lived in the silence between words, in the pauses that stretched a little too long, in the way her father held her hand just slightly tighter on their walks to school. Claire discovered that power was not neutral. She had believed, without ever examining the belief, that her wealth simply existed, a fact of life as natural as gravity. She had not understood that power made choices, took sides, shaped outcomes whether you wanted it to or not. Her silence at the party had been a choice. Her invitation to Marcus had been a choice. Every moment of looking away, of not intervening, of allowing the cruelty to continue, had been a choice. And choices had consequences, not just for the people she had hurt, but for herself. She was living with those consequences now, in the empty hours of her empty penthouse, in the reflection she could not quite meet. The woman in the mirror was not who she had thought she was. The woman in the mirror was someone who needed to change. She began reading books about race in America, about class and privilege, about the invisible structures that shaped whose lives mattered and whose did not. She did not do this for absolution or for praise. She did it because she needed to understand what she had been part of, what she had allowed to happen, what she had been complicit in her whole life without ever seeing it clearly. Understanding was not the same as action, but it was where action had to begin. The next time Marcus saw Claire was 3 weeks later. He was buffing the floor in the basement parking garage when he heard the elevator doors open and saw her step out. She was alone. No driver, no assistant, no entourage. Just a woman in expensive clothes standing in a concrete cavern that smelled of motor oil and cleaning supplies. She walked toward him without hesitation, her heels clicking against the floor he had just polished. He stopped working and waited, his expression neutral. There were no witnesses here, no cameras, no journalists, no society columns to record what happened next. Whatever she had come to say, she had come to say it to him, and only to him. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between them, insufficient and necessary. Marcus did not respond immediately. He leaned on his mop handle, studying her face for something he could trust. "For which part?" he asked finally. Claire flinched at the question, but she did not look away. "For inviting you the way I did. For the reason I did it. For standing there and saying nothing while they treated you like a joke. For all of it." Marcus absorbed this in silence. He had learned long ago that apologies were easy. Words cost nothing. What mattered was what came after. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Why now? Why here?" Claire took a breath. "Because I needed you to know that I know. What I did. What it meant. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to believe that I understand." He watched her for a long moment. She was uncomfortable, standing in this basement in her expensive clothes, surrounded by the machinery of a world she had never had to think about. But she was here. That counted for something. "Not enough, but something. Understanding is a start," he said. "But it's not enough. Not for me. Not for the people who clean your floors and wash your dishes and make your life possible while you pretend we don't exist." His voice was calm, without accusation. "Just truth, stated plainly. If you really understand, then do something about it. Change the way things work. Use your power for something other than parties and performances. You have resources. You have influence. Use them for people who don't have those things." Claire nodded slowly. She did not defend herself, did not make excuses, did not promise things she could not deliver. She just nodded and said, "I'm going to try." It was not a grand declaration. It was not a promise of transformation. It was just a statement of intent, offered without guarantee. Marcus respected that more than he would have respected eloquence. Eloquence was another form of performance. Intent was the beginning of action. "Trying is better than nothing," he said. "But trying isn't enough either. You have to actually do it. Every day. Even when no one's watching. Especially when no one's watching." Claire met his eyes. "I know." At the end of the hallway, a small figure appeared. Maya, coming to find her father. She stopped when she saw the strange woman, watching with the wary alertness of a child who has learned that adults cannot always be trusted. She did not approach, did not speak. She just stood there, waiting, her eyes moving between her father and this stranger in expensive clothes. Marcus turned and walked toward his daughter, leaving Claire standing alone in the basement she owned but had never really seen. Maya took his hand when he reached her, and they walked together toward the maintenance room, their footsteps echoing in the concrete silence. Behind them, Claire remained motionless for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back to the elevator, her heels clicking against the floor, the sound fading as the doors closed behind her. 2 months later, Claire convened a meeting in one of the Meridian's conference rooms. It was not a party. There were no champagne flutes or silver trays or gowns that cost more than most people's rent. Just a long table surrounded by building management, union representatives, and a handful of residents who had agreed to participate. The topic was working conditions, wages, dignity, the invisible infrastructure of labor that made their comfortable lives possible. Marcus had been invited to speak, not as a representative or a symbol, but as himself, a man who worked in the building, a man with a perspective worth hearing. He almost did not come. He had no interest in being paraded in front of wealthy people again, no desire to perform his own authenticity for their education. But something in Claire's invitation felt different this time. Something had changed. The invitation had come with a specific agenda, specific proposals, specific commitments. It was not performance, it was work. He entered the conference room in his work uniform, having just come off his shift. He did not apologize for his clothes, or his tiredness, or his presence. He sat at the table like he belonged there, because someone had decided that he did. Claire opened the meeting with a statement that surprised him. She talked about the party, about what had happened, about what she had learned from it. She did not sanitize the story or make herself the hero. She told the truth, including the parts that made her look bad. Especially those parts. The room listened in uncomfortable silence. Then she turned to Marcus and asked if he would share his perspective. Not on that night specifically, but on what it was like to work in a building like this. To be seen and not seen, to maintain a world that did not acknowledge your existence. He spoke for 10 minutes. He did not tell a story of suffering or ask for sympathy. He simply described reality. The early mornings and late nights, the moments of being looked through like glass, the calculations required to move through spaces where your presence was barely tolerated. The cost of invisibility, paid daily in small denominations of dignity. He spoke about his daughter, about what he wanted for her future, about the world he was trying to build, one careful choice at a time. When he finished, the room was silent. Not the hostile silence of the party, but something different. Something that felt almost like listening, almost like understanding. A woman from building management started to speak, her voice defensive, ready to explain why things were the way they were. Claire stopped her with a raised hand. "We're not here to defend the status quo," she said. "We're here to change it." The discussion that followed was not easy. There were disagreements, pushback, moments when it seemed like nothing would come of any of it. But the conversation continued. People listened. Ideas were proposed. Commitments were made, with timelines and accountability and follow-through. Marcus watched it all with cautious hope. He had been disappointed too many times to believe that words would automatically become actions. But he had also lived long enough to know that change always started somewhere. It started with someone deciding that things could be different. It started with a room full of people who had been comfortable becoming uncomfortable. It started with the first honest conversation in a building that had been built on polite lies. He did not know if it would last. He did not know if anything would actually change. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like something might. The changes that followed were not revolutionary. They were small and specific and real. Better scheduling practices that respected workers' lives outside the building. A grievance system that actually functioned. Training for supervisory staff on respectful communication. A commitment to acknowledging the humanity of the people who made the building function. None of it would make headlines. None of it would transform the fundamental inequities of a society built on invisible labor. But it was a start. A concrete, measurable start. Marcus continued working the night shift at the Meridian. He still pushed his mop down empty hallways, still emptied trash cans and polished floors, and maintained the machinery that made other people's comfort possible. But something had shifted, not in the work itself, but in the acknowledgement of it. He was no longer quite so invisible. People said hello in the elevators now. Not everyone, but some. The small courtesies of recognition that cost nothing and meant everything. Claire changed too, though her changes were harder to see. She stopped attending the parties that had once defined her social life. She started asking questions she had never thought to ask before, about where her money came from, about who benefited and who paid the cost, about what it meant to have power and how to use it responsibly. She did not become a saint. She was still rich, still privileged, still benefiting from systems that harmed others. But she was no longer pretending that her comfort was innocent. On a spring evening, Marcus finished his shift and went to collect Maya from the small room where she waited for him. She was awake this time, reading a book about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals. He watched her from the doorway for a moment. This perfect, small person who was the reason for everything he did. "Ready to go home?" he asked. She looked up and smiled. "Ready." They walked out of the building together, through the main lobby instead of the service entrance. The doorman nodded to Marcus as they passed. Maya's hand was warm in his. The city spread out around them, vast and indifferent, and full of stories they would never know. There was no dramatic victory to celebrate. No villain defeated, no kingdom won, no happily ever after tied up with a bow. There was only this. A man who had been used as a joke and had refused to let that joke define him. A woman who had made a cruel choice and had decided to make different choices going forward. A child who watched and learned and would grow up knowing that dignity was not something anyone could give you or take away. It lived inside, in the way you carried yourself, in the work you did with your hands, in the love you poured into building a life. Marcus had known this all along. His grandmother had taught him. Now, perhaps, a few more people knew it too. That was not nothing. In a world built on invisibility, on the careful categorization of who mattered and who did not, it was actually quite a lot. And so, they walked on, father and daughter, into the spring evening, into their ordinary, extraordinary life, into the ongoing work of being human together.